tray in Alira Voss's hands began to shake before she even understood why. She had been walking through the great hall of Castle Ashriver for 3 years now, carrying plates of roasted meat and warm bread to lords and generals who never once looked at her face. Tonight should have been the same as every other night, but halfway across the marble floor, something cold brushed against her ankle, and when she looked down, she saw it. A shadow, shaped like a wolf. It was not attached to any candle, any statue, any body that made sense. It sat coiled behind the king's throne, tall as a grown man, its head low, and its eyes narrow, watching the room the way a guard dog watches a door it does not trust. Alira froze in place. The shadow's head turned, slow and deliberate, until its unseen eyes locked directly onto hers. The tray slipped from her fingers. Silver plates rang against the stone floor like alarm bells, and roasted meat scattered across the polished tiles. Conversation stopped. Every noble in that hall turned to stare at the clumsy servant girl who had just ruined the king's dinner. Every noble except one. King Cade Ashriver did not look at the mess on the floor. He looked at Alira's face, and what he saw there made the color drain from his own. She was staring past him, not at him, past him, at the empty space behind his throne, where nothing visible existed at all. "Leave us," Cade said, his voice low and even, though something dangerous moved beneath it. The hall emptied within seconds. Servants, guards, advisors, all of them filed out with the practiced obedience of people who knew better than to question their king's tone. Alira remained kneeling on the floor, gathering scattered bread with trembling hands, wishing she could disappear into the tiles beneath her. "Look at me," Cade said. She did not want to. 3 years of service had taught her one rule above all others: never draw the king's attention. He was not cruel, not the way stories described tyrant kings in other kingdoms, but he was distant, cold, carved from something harder than most men. His pack whispered that he had not smiled since before Alira arrived at the castle. Some said he had not laughed in a decade. She rose to her feet slowly, keeping her eyes fixed somewhere near his boots. "Your Majesty," she said, "I am sorry for the mess. I will clean it at once and bring a fresh plate." "That is not what I asked." His voice had moved closer. She realized, with a jolt of panic, that he had stepped down from the raised platform where his throne sat, and was now only a few feet away from her. Kings did not step down. Kings did not stand this close to kitchen maids. "What did you see?" he asked. Alira's heart pounded so hard she was certain he could hear it. She thought of lying. She thought of saying she had simply tripped, that her foot had caught on the hem of her dress, that nothing strange had happened at all. But something about the way he stood, tense as a drawn bowstring, told her that a lie would not survive contact with those eyes. "A shadow," she whispered, "behind your throne. Shaped like a wolf. It looked at me." The silence that followed felt longer than the entire dinner service had been. Cade's jaw tightened. His hands, usually so still and composed, curled into fists at his sides. "Say that again," he said quietly. "A wolf," Alira repeated, her voice barely above a breath now. "A wolf made of shadow. It was sitting behind you, watching the room. And then it turned, and looked right at me." Cade closed his eyes. For one heartbeat, the mask of the Alpha King slipped, and Alira saw something underneath it that she had never expected to see on his face. Fear. Not the fear of a man threatened by an enemy blade, but something older, something that had been buried and hidden and guarded for a very long time. "No one has seen that in 11 years, he said, almost to himself. "No one but me." Alira did not understand what she had stumbled into, but every instinct in her body told her this was not a conversation she was meant to survive unscathed. Servants who learned the king's secrets did not usually remain servants for long. Some vanished quietly into other postings in distant villages. Others, the older cooks murmured late at night when they thought no one listened, simply vanished. "I did not mean to see anything, Your Majesty," she said quickly. "I will forget it. I promise you, I will never speak of it again." "Forgetting is not the problem," Cade said. His eyes opened again, and this time they were sharp, calculating, studying her the way a hunter studies unfamiliar tracks in the snow. "The problem is that you saw it at all." He turned and walked back toward the throne, and Alira watched, disbelieving her own eyes, as the shadow uncoiled itself from behind the seat and rose to follow him. It moved exactly like a living wolf, its shoulders rolling with each step, its head swinging low as it studied its surroundings. No one else in the hall would have noticed a thing. To every other person who might have walked through that room, the space behind the throne would have looked simply empty. But Alira saw it clearly, the way she saw the king himself, the way she saw the flickering candlelight and the cold stone floor beneath her feet. "Come with me," Cade said. It was not a request. Alira followed him through a narrow corridor behind the great hall, one she had never been permitted to enter before, lined with old tapestries depicting wolves in various poses of hunting and howling and standing guard over sleeping villages. The shadow trailed a few steps behind them both, silent, weightless, but somehow present in a way that made the hair on Alira's arms rise. They stopped in a small private study, warmed by a low fire and lined with shelves of leather-bound books. Cade closed the door behind them and turned to face her fully for the first time. "What is your name?" he asked. "Alira Voss, Your Majesty." "How long have you served in this castle, Alira?" 3 years. "And in 3 years, have you ever seen anything else unusual? Anything you could not explain?" Alira hesitated. She had, in fact, seen strange things her entire life. Flickers of movement in empty rooms, shapes in fog that dissolved the moment she tried to focus on them. But she had learned long ago that speaking of such things earned nothing but suspicious looks and worried whispers. She had trained herself to stay quiet, to keep her eyes down, to pretend the world looked as ordinary to her as it did to everyone else. "Sometimes," she admitted finally, "small things, shadows that move wrong, shapes that should not be there. I never told anyone. I thought it best to keep such things to myself." Cade studied her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted from suspicion into something closer to disbelief, and beneath that, something that looked almost like hope. "What you saw tonight was not simply a trick of the candlelight," he said. "It is my wolf." Alira blinked. "Your wolf, Your Majesty?" "Every alpha is bonded to a wolf spirit," Cade explained, his voice careful, measured, the tone of a man choosing each word with great caution. "It lives within us, gives us our strength, our senses, our right to lead. For most alphas, the bond is visible only in the eyes, in moments of anger or power. But mine was severed years ago, torn from my body during a betrayal I do not wish to discuss tonight. What remains of my wolf now exists only as a shadow. It follows me everywhere. It protects me, but no living soul besides myself has been able to see it. Not my advisors, not my healers, not even the strongest trackers in my own pack. Until tonight," Alira said quietly. "Until tonight," Cade agreed. The shadow wolf moved closer to Alira, as though drawn by the sound of her voice, and she fought the urge to step backward. It circled her slowly, its unseen nose lowering as though catching her scent, and then, to her utter astonishment, it sat down directly beside her feet, calm and still, the way a loyal hound settles beside its master. Cade watched this with an expression Alira could not read at all. "It has never done that before," he murmured. "Not once, not with anyone." "What does that mean?" Alira asked, unable to keep the tremor from her voice. "I do not know," Cade admitted, "but I intend to find out. And until I do, you are going to keep this a secret from everyone in this castle. Do you understand me?" Alira nodded quickly. "Yes, Your Majesty. I understand." "Good." Cade turned toward the fire, his back to her now, his shoulders tense beneath his dark coat. "Because if word spreads that the Alpha King's bond is broken, that his wolf exists only as a shadow that even his own advisors cannot see, there are packs beyond these walls who would use that knowledge to challenge my throne. Men who have waited years for exactly this kind of weakness." "I would never tell anyone," Alira said firmly. "I swear it." Cade turned back to face her, and for the first time since she had known him, there was something almost gentle in his gaze, though it was buried deep beneath layers of caution and control. "You will return to your duties as normal," he said, "but I may call for you again. There are things I need to understand about why you can see what no one else can, and there are things I suspect that my wolf wishes to understand about you as well." Alira glanced down at the shadow still resting quietly beside her feet, its outline shifting gently in the firelight, like smoke that refused to disperse. "It is not dangerous, is it?" she asked. "No," Cade said. "It has never harmed anyone. It only protects." He paused, studying the shadow, with an expression somewhere between longing and confusion. Though I confess, I do not entirely understand what it is protecting tonight. Alira did not have an answer for that. She only knew that as she walked back to the kitchens a few minutes later, her apron dusted with flour, and her hands still trembling faintly, she could feel a warmth trailing just behind her, low to the ground, patient and quiet, following her every step, like a shadow that had finally found something worth guarding. She did not look back to confirm it. She did not need to. She already knew it was there. The warmth followed her all the way to her narrow bed that night, curling against the floorboards beside her mattress, like an animal that refused to leave its post. Alira lay awake for hours, staring at the low ceiling of the servants' quarters, listening to the soft breathing of the other maids around her. None of them stirred. None of them noticed the faint shifting of shadow near the foot of her bed, the way the darkness there seemed thicker than the darkness everywhere else in the room. She reached out once, cautiously, her fingers hovering just above the shape, and felt nothing but cool air. Yet the shadow shifted slightly at her movement, as though it had felt her reach toward it in return. By morning, she convinced herself she must have imagined the whole encounter. Kitchen maids did not speak with kings in private studies. Kitchen maids did not have ancient wolf spirits settling beside their beds at night. She rose before dawn, as she always did, tied her apron over her plain gray dress, and made her way down to the kitchens to begin the long list of chores that filled every one of her days. But when she reached the bottom of the stairwell, the head cook, a stout woman named Marta Doyle, grabbed her by the arm before she could even remove her cloak. "The king wants you," Marta said, her eyes wide with a mixture of alarm and curiosity. "Sent a guard down not 10 minutes ago, asking specifically for the girl who dropped the tray last night. I told him you'd be along shortly, but Alira, what in the world did you do?" Alira's stomach twisted into a knot. "Nothing," she said quickly. "It was an accident. I tripped." Marta did not look convinced, but she released Alira's arm and gestured toward the door. "Well, go on then. You don't keep an alpha king waiting, accident or not." Alira climbed the narrow servant stairs to the upper halls of the castle, her heart hammering with every step. She half expected to find guards waiting to escort her to some dark chamber where troublesome secrets were quietly buried. Instead, she found Cade standing alone in the same private study from the night before, dressed in simple dark clothing, rather than his usual formal robes, looking as though he had not slept at all. "Close the door," he said. She obeyed, and the moment the latch clicked shut, the shadow wolf appeared from the corner of the room, gliding across the floor toward her, with the same silent grace it had shown the previous night. This time, Alira did not flinch. She had spent half the night convincing herself it was harmless, and standing here now, watching it approach with something that almost resembled curiosity, she found she believed that more than she expected to. "Did it follow you last night?" Kate asked, watching her carefully. Alira considered lying, then decided against it. Whatever strange arrangement she had fallen into, dishonesty seemed like the fastest way to lose whatever fragile trust existed between them. "Yes," she said. "It stayed near my bed the whole night. I felt it there even when I could not see clearly in the dark." Cade's expression tightened, and he turned away from her, pacing toward the window that overlooked the training yards below, where soldiers were already drilling in the cold morning air. "This has never happened before," he said, more to himself than to her. "In 11 years, it has never left my side for more than a few minutes. It stays close during meetings, during meals, even when I sleep. But last night, it remained with you the entire time, and only returned to me at dawn." "Is that bad?" Alira asked. "I do not know what it means yet," Kate admitted. "That is what troubles me most." He turned back to face her, studying her the way a man studies a puzzle he suspects has no solution. "Tell me about yourself, Alira. Where were you born? Who are your parents?" The question caught her off guard. No one in the castle had ever asked about her life before service. She was simply Alira, the quiet girl who carried trays and scrubbed pots, and never spoke unless spoken to first. "I was born in a small village, 2 days' ride from here," she said. "My mother died when I was young. My father sent me to work in this castle when I was 15, hoping I would have a better life than the one our village could offer. I have not seen him since." "And the strange things you mentioned last night, the shadows that moved wrong, the shapes that dissolved when you looked at them directly, when did those begin?" For as long as I can remember, Elira said. My mother used to say I had old eyes. She meant it kindly, I think, though I never understood what she meant until much later. Cade's brow furrowed at that, and he crossed the room to one of the tall bookshelves lining the far wall, running his fingers along a row of ancient, cracked spines until he found the one he wanted. He pulled it free and set it on the table between them, opening it to a page marked with a faded ribbon. There is an old belief among the pack elders, he said, that certain humans are born with the ability to see what wolves see, spirits and bonds and shadows invisible to ordinary eyes. They are called seers, though the practice of naming them fell out of fashion generations ago. Most alphas dismissed it as superstition. Elira leaned closer to look at the page, filled with faded ink illustrations of wolves standing beside human figures, shadows connecting them at the chest like invisible threads. Do you believe I am one of these seers? She asked. I believe, Cade said slowly, that there is no other explanation for what happened last night. And I believe my wolf has recognized something in you that it has not recognized in anyone else in over a decade. The shadow wolf, as though understanding it was being discussed, moved to sit directly between them, its head tilting first toward Cade and then toward Elira, back and forth, almost as if it were watching a conversation it wished it could join. What happens now? Elira asked. Cade closed the old book carefully, his fingers lingering on the worn leather cover. Now I need your help. If my wolf trusts you, perhaps it will show you things it has hidden even from me. I need to understand why it was severed from me in the first place, and whether there is any way to restore the bond fully. If I remain like this, weakened and incomplete, it is only a matter of time before rival packs discover the truth and use it against me. I am only a kitchen maid, Elira said quietly. I do not know anything about wolf bonds or ancient magic. No, Cade agreed. But you can see what no one else can see. That alone makes you more valuable to me right now than any advisor in this castle. He extended a hand toward her, an oddly formal gesture between a king and a servant, but Elira found herself reaching out and taking it before she had fully decided to do so. His grip was warm and steady, and the moment their hands met, the shadow wolf let out a low sound, not quite a growl, and not quite a whine, something in between, that seemed to carry both relief and warning at once. You will report to me each evening after your kitchen duties are finished, Cade said. No one else will know the reason. As far as the rest of the castle is concerned, you are simply attending to additional cleaning duties in the private wing. And if someone asks why the king requires a kitchen maid so often, then they will learn that kings do not explain themselves to servants, Cade said, though there was the faintest hint of something almost like humor in his tone, quickly suppressed. Marta will not question it further. She values her position too highly. Elira nodded, though her mind raced with questions she did not dare ask. What would it mean to spend hours each evening in the presence of the Alpha King and his invisible wolf? What secrets was she about to become entangled in, and what would happen to her if those secrets were ever discovered by the wrong people? One more thing, Cade said as she turned to leave. Whatever happens between us during these evenings, you are not to speak of it to anyone. Not Marta, not the other maids, not even in your prayers before sleep. Do you understand the danger you are stepping into? I think I am beginning to, Elira said honestly. Good, Cade said, because I do not yet fully understand it myself. She left the study with her heart still pounding, the shadow wolf trailing a few steps behind her, all the way to the top of the servant's stairwell, before finally peeling away and returning to its master's side. Elira descended into the kitchens with flour dust still on her hands, and an entirely new weight settled across her shoulders, one she could not explain to a single soul around her. That evening, as she scrubbed the last of the dinner pots in the dim candlelight of the kitchen, Marta approached her with a knowing look and a raised eyebrow. Additional cleaning duties in the private wing, Marta repeated slowly, clearly unconvinced, but wise enough not to press further. Well, mind you keep your apron tied and your eyes down, girl. Whatever business the king has with you, it is no business of ours to ask about. Elira only nodded, drying her hands on the worn fabric of her apron, feeling the faint, familiar warmth already gathering somewhere behind her, patient and waiting, ready to follow her wherever the coming evening would lead. The private study became Elira's second home over the following 2 weeks, though she told no one, not even Marta, what truly happened behind its heavy wooden door each evening. Cade would wait for her by the fire, a stack of ancient texts spread across the table, his sleeves rolled up, and ink stains marking his fingers from hours spent copying old passages by candlelight. The shadow wolf greeted her now, with something close to enthusiasm, circling her ankles the moment she entered the room, before settling near the hearth, its unseen eyes following her every movement with quiet attention. "Tell me what you see tonight," Cade said one evening, not looking up from the page in front of him. Elira glanced toward the shadow curled by the fire. "It looks tired," she said. "Its head is low, and it keeps glancing toward the window, like it wants to be somewhere else." Cade's pen stopped moving. "Tired," he repeated. "That is new. Is that important?" "Everything about its behavior lately has been new," Cade said, setting down his pen and rubbing his eyes with the heel of his hand. "For 11 years it has been silent and still, a fragment of something broken, following me out of habit rather than purpose. But since you arrived, it moves like it did before the betrayal. It reacts. It feels things." Elira lowered herself into the chair across from him, the one she had begun to think of as her own over these past 2 weeks. "What happened to you?" she asked quietly. "The betrayal you keep mentioning. You have never told me the whole story." Cade was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire, as though the flames held answers he had spent years avoiding. "There was a man in my father's court," he said finally. "Garen Pike. He served as an advisor for nearly 20 years, trusted by 3 generations of alphas before me. When my father died and I took the throne, Garen remained at my side, guiding me through decisions I was too young and too grieving to make alone. I trusted him completely." He paused, his jaw tightening. Garen believed the throne should belong to his own bloodline, not mine. He spent years quietly building alliances among the lesser packs, promising titles and land in exchange for loyalty, once he found a way to remove me. When his plans were finally ready, he used an old and forbidden ritual, one meant to sever the bond between an alpha and his wolf entirely. He believed that without my wolf, I would be too weak to hold the throne, and the pack would turn against me on its own. "But it did not work," Elira said. "Not completely." "No," Cade agreed. "The ritual was interrupted before it could finish. My wolf was not destroyed, only fractured, pushed into this shadow state where it exists, but cannot fully manifest. Garen was executed for his treason, but the damage to my bond could never be undone. Every healer, every elder, every scholar I have consulted since has told me the same thing. Once a bond is severed this way, it remains severed forever. Until now," Elira said softly. Cade looked up at her, something raw and unguarded crossing his face before he could stop it. "Until you," he said. The shadow wolf lifted its head from its resting position by the fire and turned to look at them both, and for the first time since Elira had begun these evening visits, she thought she saw something that almost resembled hope moving through its dark, formless shape. "There is a passage here," Cade said, pulling one of the older books closer and turning it toward her, "that speaks of seers, not simply observing broken bonds, but strengthening them. It says that when a seer's presence aligns with a wolf's spirit, the bond can begin to heal, slowly, over time, as trust between the seer and the alpha grows stronger." "You think that is what is happening to us?" "I do not know what else to think," Cade admitted. 2 weeks ago, my wolf was a silent shadow that barely reacted to anything around it. Tonight, it grows restless when it senses you have had a difficult day, and calm when you feel safe. It is beginning to feel again, Elira, and I believe it is because of you." Elira did not know how to respond to that. The weight of his words settled over her slowly, heavier than anything she had carried in years of castle service. She was no one important, a girl from a small village with a father who had sent her away, and a mother who had died too young to teach her much of anything beyond kindness and quiet strength. And yet somehow, impossibly, she had become tangled in the fate of a king's broken spirit. "What do you need from me?" she asked, truly, beyond simply describing what I see each evening. Cade considered the question carefully before answering. "I need you to keep coming," he said. "I need you to keep letting my wolf grow familiar with your presence, whatever that means for its healing. And I need you to trust me, even though I have given you very little reason to do so beyond a handful of evenings by this fire." "You have given me more reason than you realize," Elira said before she could stop herself. Cade's eyes lifted to meet hers, something questioning in his expression. "You are the only person in this castle," Elira continued, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. Who has ever asked me about my life before service? Who has ever looked at me and seen something other than a girl meant to carry trays and scrub floors? Whatever this is, whatever strange bond your wolf has found in me, I do not regret being part of it. The silence that followed stretched long enough that Alira feared she had said too much, revealed too much of herself to a man whose position placed him impossibly far above her own. But Cade did not look away, and the shadow wolf, sensing something shift in the air between them, rose from its place by the fire and moved to rest its head gently against Alira's knee, a gesture so tender and unexpected that her breath caught in her throat. "It has never done that either," Cade said quietly. "What does it mean?" Alira asked. "I think," Cade said slowly, choosing his words with obvious care, "that it means my wolf has decided something about you, that I am only beginning to understand myself." Before Alira could ask him to explain further, a sharp knock sounded at the study door, and both of them startled, the shadow wolf vanishing back into the shadows near the hearth, as though it had never moved at all. Cade rose quickly, straightening his sleeves and composing his expression into the cold, distant mask Alira recognized from the great hall. "Enter," he called. A guard stepped inside, bowing quickly. "Your Majesty, forgive the interruption. A messenger has arrived from the Northern Territories. He says the matter cannot wait until morning." Cade's expression darkened. "Send him to the receiving chamber. I will be there shortly." The guard bowed again and departed, leaving the door open behind him. Cade turned back to Alira, and for a moment, the warmth that had filled the room only seconds earlier seemed to drain away entirely. "Go back to the servants' quarters," he said, his voice returning to its usual measured formality. "We will continue this tomorrow evening." Alira nodded and rose from her chair, gathering her shawl around her shoulders. As she reached the door, she paused and looked back at him, standing tall and composed once more, every trace of the vulnerable man she had glimpsed moments earlier carefully hidden away. "Your Majesty," she said, "whoever sent that message, I hope the news is not troubling." Cade's expression remained unreadable. "So do I," he said quietly. "So do I." She left the study with unease, settling deep in her stomach, uncertain whether it belonged to her or to the faint warmth still trailing behind her, restless now, in a way it had not been only minutes before. The messenger from the Northern Territories brought word that a border settlement had been raided in the night, its grain stores burned and several guards wounded defending the walls. Cade spent the following 3 days locked in meetings with his generals, and Alira did not see him once during that time, though the shadow wolf found ways to reach her regardless. She first noticed it on the second morning, while kneading dough in the castle kitchens. A sudden warmth pressed against her ankles beneath the heavy wooden table, gentle and familiar, though she could see nothing there when she glanced down. Marta, standing beside her chopping vegetables, noticed nothing unusual at all, continuing her work without pause. "You've gone quiet again," Marta said, not looking up from her cutting board. "Whatever business you have with the private wing, it seems to be weighing on you." "It is nothing," Alira said quickly, though the warmth against her ankles shifted, almost as if it disagreed with her answer. By the third day, the presence had grown bolder. Alira found herself reaching into her apron pocket for a cloth to wipe down the counter, only to feel something faintly solid brush against her fingers. Gone, the instant she tried to grasp it more firmly. That evening, while hanging laundry in the courtyard, she felt the unmistakable sensation of something pressing warmly against the back of her apron, as though curling itself into the folds of fabric there, hidden from view. She said nothing to anyone. There was no one to tell, and even if there had been, she doubted anyone would believe that the Alpha King's broken wolf spirit had taken to following a kitchen maid through her daily chores, tucking itself against her apron whenever it found the opportunity. On the fourth evening, a guard finally arrived at the kitchen door to summon her back to the private study. Alira hurried up the servants' stairs with a mixture of relief and nervous anticipation, her heart lifting at the thought of seeing Cade again, though she quickly reminded herself that such feelings were dangerous and foolish for a girl in her position to entertain. She found him standing by the window, dark circles beneath his eyes, and his usually composed posture betraying deep exhaustion. The shadow wolf, which had spent 3 days trailing after Alira through her chores, now sat between them, its head turning back and forth, as though caught between two masters it could not choose between. "The northern raid was worse than we first believed," Cade said without preamble. 3 villages, not one. Grain stores destroyed before winter, guards wounded, and no clear indication of who ordered the attack. Do you have suspicions? Elira asked. I have more than suspicions, Cade said grimly. There is only one alpha bold enough to strike this close to my territory, without fear of consequence. Draven Cole rules the Eastern Pax, and he has made no secret of his ambition to expand his borders at my expense. If word of my broken bond reaches him, if he learns that my wolf exists only as a fractured shadow that even my own advisors cannot see, he will not stop at burning grain stores. Elira felt a chill move through her that had nothing to do with the cool evening air drifting through the study window. You think he already suspects something? I think, Cade said slowly, that a man like Draven Cole watches for weakness, the way a hawk watches for movement in tall grass. And I have been careless these past weeks, spending so much time locked away with a kitchen maid that even Marta has begun to notice the pattern. What should we do? Elira asked. Cade turned from the window to look at her fully, and something in his expression softened despite the exhaustion etched across his face. Nothing different, he said. We cannot stop now, not when my wolf has finally begun to heal, after 11 years of silence. But we must be more careful. No more evening visits that stretch for hours. No more lingering in hallways, where guards might notice how it follows you, rather than me. It followed me for 3 days while you were in meetings, Elira admitted. I felt it near me constantly. Under my apron, mostly. Though I could never quite catch hold of it. Cade's brow furrowed at that, and he crossed the room to stand closer to her, studying the space around her shoulders and waist, as though trying to see what she described. It has never left my side for that long before. Not even during our evening sessions together. 3 full days is... He trailed off, clearly searching for words that made sense of something entirely unprecedented. Is that dangerous? Elira asked. For you, I mean. Without your wolf, close by, during such an important crisis. I do not know, Cade admitted, and there was something almost raw in his honesty. I have never been without it for this long, not since the ritual. And yet, strangely, I have not felt weaker these past 3 days. If anything, I have felt... He paused again, searching for the right word. Steadier, as though its presence near you somehow still reaches back to me, even across distance. The shadow wolf, as if responding to this admission, rose and moved to stand directly between them, its shape flickering gently in the candlelight, its head tilting first toward Cade, and then toward Elira, in that same familiar back-and-forth motion it had shown days earlier in this very room. What if, Elira said carefully, the bond is not meant to belong only to you anymore? What if it has found something in both of us together that it never found in you alone? Cade was quiet for a long moment, considering this possibility with visible unease. The old texts speak of seers strengthening broken bonds, he said finally. They do not speak of bonds shifting to include another person entirely. If such a thing were happening, I would need to understand it fully, before Draven Cole or anyone else discovers what is taking place within these walls. And if it cannot be fully understood, Elira asked, if your wolf has simply chosen something neither of us can control? Cade did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached out, slowly, cautiously, and rested his hand near the shadow wolf's head, the closest Elira had ever seen him come to physically touching the fractured spirit that had haunted him for over a decade. The shadow remained still beneath his hand, calm and steady, though Elira noticed it also leaned, ever so slightly, toward her direction at the same time. Then I suppose, Cade said quietly, we will have to learn to control very little, and trust a great deal more than either of us are accustomed to. A knock interrupted them once again, though this time it was gentler, more hesitant than the urgent summons from days before. Cade called for entry, and a young guard stepped inside, bowing quickly before speaking. Forgive me, Your Majesty. Lady Marta from the kitchens asked me to deliver a message. She says supper preparations require additional hands tonight, given the extra guests arriving from the border patrol. She requests that Elira return promptly. Cade's expression flickered with something between frustration and resignation. Tell her I will send Elira down shortly. The guard bowed again and departed, and Cade turned back to Elira with a faint, tired smile, the first genuine smile she had ever seen cross his face in the weeks she had known him. Careful, he said. Remember. I remember, Elira said, gathering her shawl and moving toward the door. As she stepped out into the corridor, she felt the familiar warmth settle once more against the back of her apron, patient and quiet, following her all the way down to the kitchens where extra hands were needed, and where no one, not Marta, not the guards passing through the halls, not a single soul in that entire castle, would ever guess what she carried hidden beneath the plain gray fabric she wore every single day. And supper for the Border Patrol guests stretched late into the night, and Alira did not return to her narrow bed until well past midnight, her feet aching, and her hands raw from hours of scrubbing pots in scalding water. Marta had worked her harder than usual, perhaps sensing something unspoken in the air, perhaps simply overwhelmed by the sudden influx of hungry soldiers filling the castle's lower halls. Despite her exhaustion, Alira found herself unable to sleep once she finally lay down. The warmth beneath her apron, which she had carefully hung on its usual hook beside her bed, seemed to pulse faintly in the darkness, restless in a way she had not felt from it before. She rose quietly, careful not to wake the other maids sleeping nearby, and lifted the apron from its hook, holding it against her chest. "What is it?" she whispered, feeling foolish for speaking to a garment as though it might answer her. The shadow wolf, gathering itself from the folds of fabric, moved to sit at her feet, its head lifted toward the small window near the ceiling of the servants' quarters. Alira followed its gaze, and saw nothing but darkness and distant stars, yet something about its posture told her it sensed movement somewhere beyond the castle walls that she could not perceive herself. She did not know what to do with this information. Waking Cade in the middle of the night over a feeling she could not explain seemed reckless, especially after his careful warning about discretion only hours earlier. Instead, she settled back onto her mattress, the apron clutched loosely in her arms, and eventually drifted into an uneasy sleep filled with half-formed dreams of shadow and starlight. Morning brought no answers, only the same routine of chores and duties that filled every day of her service. It was not until 3 evenings later, when Cade finally summoned her back to the private study, that she had the chance to share what she had felt. The Border Patrol guests, Cade explained once she arrived, his expression grim, brought word of movement along Draven Cole's territory. Scouts, likely, testing our defenses to see how quickly we respond. Nothing has crossed into our lands directly, but the pattern suggests preparation for something larger. Your wolf sensed something too, Alira said. 3 nights ago, late, after I returned from supper duties. It grew restless and stared toward the window as though it could feel movement far beyond the castle. Cade's eyes sharpened with sudden interest. What time exactly? Alira thought back carefully. Near midnight, I believe, perhaps slightly after. That matches the scout reports precisely, Cade said, moving quickly toward the table where a large map lay spread across its surface, marked with small figures, indicating troop movements and border patrols. If my wolf can sense danger through its connection to you, even at such distance, then perhaps the bond is stronger than either of us realized. Is that good news or troubling news? Alira asked. Both, Cade admitted. Good, because it means my wolf's senses have returned in ways I feared were lost forever. Troubling, because it means you are now tied to dangers that extend far beyond simple kitchen gossip and servant quarters. If Draven Cole moves against us, and if this bond continues to strengthen between us, you may find yourself standing far closer to the heart of this conflict than any kitchen maid should ever have to stand. Alira absorbed this quietly, watching the shadow wolf pace slowly along the edge of the map, its unseen paws moving across marked villages and rivers, as though studying the terrain itself. I am not afraid, she said finally. You should be, Cade said, though his tone carried no unkindness, only weary honesty. I have watched good soldiers, brave men who have served this pack for decades, grow afraid when Draven Cole's name is mentioned. He does not fight fairly, and he does not stop simply because his opponent begs for mercy. Then I suppose it is fortunate I have no intention of begging, Alira said, lifting her chin slightly, despite the nervous flutter in her chest. Something flickered across Cade's face, an expression she could not quite name, somewhere between admiration and concern. You remind me of my mother, he said quietly. She was not born into nobility either. She came from a small pack in the eastern hills, chosen by my father not for her lineage, but for her strength of will. The court never fully accepted her, not until the day she stood between my father and an assassin's blade, and refused to move, even when threatened. What happened to her? Alira asked. She survived that day, Cade said, a faint, sad smile crossing his lips. She lived many years afterward, respected by every soldier and advisor who had once doubted her. She died of illness when I was young, long before Garen's betrayal, but I still remember the way she used to say that true strength was not about bloodline or birth, but about refusing to abandon what mattered most, no matter the cost. Illyra felt something warm settle in her chest at these words, though she quickly reminded herself that comparing a servant girl to a beloved late queen was dangerous ground for either of them to walk upon. "Your Majesty," she said carefully, "whatever this bond means, whatever danger it might bring, I do not regret it. I only wish to understand how I might help you, truly help you, rather than simply reporting what I see each evening by this fire." Cade studied her for a long moment before responding. "There may be a way," he said slowly. "The old texts mention a ritual, one that predates even the ceremony Garen used to sever my bond in the first place. It speaks of seers who choose, deliberately and with full understanding, to bind themselves temporarily to a wolf spirit, lending their own strength to help mend what has been broken." "What would that require?" Illyra asked. "Trust," Cade said. "Complete trust, on both our parts, and a willingness to share something of yourself with a spirit you barely understand. It is not without risk. The texts are vague about what happens if the ritual fails, though they are quite clear that it has never been attempted between an alpha and someone outside the pack's own bloodline." Illyra glanced toward the shadow wolf, still pacing slowly along the edge of the map, and felt something settle firmly within her, a decision made before she had fully realized she was making it. "I am willing to try," she said. "Illyra," Cade's voice carried a warning now, gentle but firm. "You do not yet know what you are agreeing to." "Then explain it to me," she said. "All of it, and then I will decide." Cade studied her for a long moment, weighing something behind his careful eyes, before finally nodding and reaching for one of the oldest, most fragile books resting on the shelf behind him. "Very well," he said, "but understand, once we begin down this path, there will be no turning back easily. Whatever bond forms between you, my wolf, and myself, will not simply fade away because we wish it to." "I understand," Illyra said, though in truth, she suspected she understood only a fraction of what lay ahead. The shadow wolf paused its restless pacing and turned to face them both, sitting perfectly still for the first time that evening, as though it, too, understood that something important was about to change between the three of them, something that would carry consequences far beyond the quiet walls of that private study. "The ritual required 3 nights of preparation," Cade explained, each one dedicated to a different stage of binding trust between seer and spirit. Illyra spent her days performing her usual kitchen duties, as though nothing unusual occupied her thoughts, though the weight of what awaited her each evening made even the simplest tasks feel distant and strange. On the first night, Cade led her not to the private study, but to a small chapel tucked into the oldest wing of the castle, rarely used except during formal ceremonies. Candles lined the stone walls, and the shadow wolf moved ahead of them both as they entered, as though it already sensed the purpose of their visit. "Tonight is simply about presence," Cade explained, guiding her toward the center of the room, where a circle had been etched into the floor long ago, worn smooth by centuries of use. "You must sit within the circle, and allow my wolf to approach you freely, without any barrier of fear or hesitation on your part." Illyra lowered herself onto the cool stone, folding her hands in her lap, and watched as the shadow wolf approached slowly, its head low, studying her with an intensity she had grown familiar with over the past weeks. It circled her once, twice, then settled directly in front of her, resting its head against her knee the way it had done once before in the private study. "How do you feel?" Cade asked, from where he stood just outside the circle. "Calm," Illyra said, surprised by her own honesty. "Safe, somehow, though I could not explain why." Cade nodded, though something in his expression suggested this answer both relieved and troubled him in equal measure. The second night proved more demanding. Cade instructed her to close her eyes and focus entirely on the sensation of the shadow wolf's presence, allowing herself to feel its emotions, rather than simply observing its movements from a distance. Illyra sat within the same worn circle, eyes shut, and slowly became aware of something she had never noticed before. A faint current of feeling that did not belong to her, threading through her chest like a second heartbeat. I feel something, she said quietly, keeping her eyes closed. Not fear exactly. More like loneliness. Old loneliness, worn thin over many years. She heard Cade's sharp intake of breath from somewhere nearby. That is what remains of the bond, as I feel it too, he said, his voice unusually rough. 11 years of isolation, waiting for something it was never certain would come. Elira opened her eyes then, and found Cade watching her, with an expression so raw and unguarded that she almost looked away out of respect for a vulnerability he clearly had not intended to reveal. The shadow wolf, still resting against her knee, seemed to press closer, as though seeking comfort from both of them at once. I am sorry, Elira said softly, that it had to wait so long. So am I, Cade admitted. The third night arrived with a tension neither of them spoke aloud, though Elira felt it settle over the chapel the moment she stepped through its heavy wooden doors. Cade explained that this final stage required a deliberate exchange, a moment where she would offer some small piece of herself, willingly and knowingly, to strengthen the fragile threads reconnecting his wolf's fractured spirit. What must I offer? Elira asked, settling into the circle once more. A memory, Cade said. Something meaningful, something that reflects who you truly are, beneath the apron and the kitchen duties. The wolf will take what you offer freely, and use it to anchor itself more firmly, both to me, and I believe, to you as well. Elira closed her eyes and thought carefully. She considered offering a memory of her mother, gentle and warm, or perhaps the day her father sent her away from their small village, painful though it remained. Instead, she found herself drawn to something simpler, a quiet afternoon from years ago when she had first arrived at the castle, frightened and alone, and an old cook, long since retired, had shown her small unexpected kindness by teaching her to bake bread with patient hands and gentle words. She let the memory rise fully in her mind, the warmth of the ovens, the smell of rising dough, the first time she had felt, even briefly, that she belonged somewhere. The shadow wolf let out a sound unlike anything Elira had heard from it before, something between a sigh and a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the very stones beneath her. She felt warmth spread through her chest, gentle and steady, and when she opened her eyes, she found the shadow had grown slightly more defined, its edges sharper, its shape more solid than the flickering, uncertain form she had first seen behind Cade's throne weeks earlier. What happened? She asked, breathless. Cade stared at the wolf with wide, disbelieving eyes. It is becoming more whole, he said quietly. I can feel it, Elira. Something that has been broken for 11 years is beginning to mend. The following morning, Elira returned to her kitchen duties as usual, though everything felt subtly different. She noticed the shadow wolf's presence more clearly now, a constant, steady warmth that no longer required concentration to detect. It settled beneath her feet as she kneaded dough, curled near the hearth while she stirred stew, and rested quietly against the folds of her apron throughout the long hours of her work, calmer and more content than she had ever sensed it before. Marta noticed the change in Elira's demeanor immediately, though she attributed it to something far simpler than the truth. You've been humming while you work, Marta observed one afternoon, arching an eyebrow. Haven't heard you do that in the 3 years you've served here. Whatever's happening in that private wing, girl, it seems to agree with you. Elira smiled but said nothing, continuing her work as the warmth beneath her apron shifted comfortably, content and settled, exactly where it seemed to belong. That evening, however, brought news that shattered the fragile peace of the previous 3 days. A guard arrived at the kitchen door, just as Elira finished her duties, his expression tight with urgency. The king requires you immediately, he said. There is trouble at the eastern gate. Elira's stomach dropped. She hurried through the castle corridors, the warmth beneath her apron growing tense and alert with every step, until she reached the courtyard near the eastern gate, where a crowd of guards and advisors had gathered around a lone rider, his horse lathered with sweat, his own face pale with exhaustion and fear. Draven Cole's forces have crossed the northern border, the rider gasped, barely able to catch his breath. They move toward the capital even now. Your Majesty, he does not come to negotiate. He comes to challenge your throne directly, and he claims to know the truth about your broken bond. Cade's face turned to stone, though Elira, standing close enough to sense the shadow wolf's reaction, felt a surge of something fierce and protective ripple through the warmth beneath her apron, sharper and more solid than anything she had felt from it before. Whatever peace the past 3 nights had built between them, it seemed, was about to be tested far sooner than either of them had prepared for. The great hall filled with advisors and generals within the hour, every voice raised in a different direction, arguing over defenses, supply lines, and whether to send word to allied packs in the southern territories. Cade stood at the head of the long table, silent and composed, though Elira, watching from a corner near the servants' entrance where she had been ordered to wait, could see the tension coiled tight beneath his careful expression. "How does Draven Cole know?" one advisor demanded, an older man named Aldrich Fenn, whose gray beard trembled with barely contained anger. "Your Majesty, if he speaks openly of a broken bond, someone within these very walls must have carried word to him." "Or he guesses," another advisor countered. "Rumors of the king's private meetings with a kitchen servant have already spread through the lower halls. It would not take much imagination for a clever enemy to draw the wrong conclusions and gamble on their accuracy." Elira felt her face flush, though no one in the room turned to look at her directly, still unaware that the very servant they spoke of stood only a few steps away. Cade's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, though his voice remained steady when he finally spoke. "Whatever Draven Cole believes he knows," Cade said, "we will not confirm it through panic or division. Prepare the eastern defenses, double the guard along the capital walls, and send riders to the southern packs requesting immediate support, though I do not expect it to arrive before Draven's forces reach our gates." The advisors dispersed quickly, moving to carry out his orders, until only Aldrich Fenn remained, studying Cade with an expression that mixed loyalty and deep concern in equal measure. "Your Majesty," Aldrich said quietly, once the others had gone, "if Draven Cole truly believes your bond is broken, he will not simply threaten. He will attempt to prove it publicly, in front of your own pack, in front of every soldier and advisor loyal to your throne. If he succeeds in exposing such a weakness, you understand what that means for your rule." "I understand precisely what it means," Cade said, his voice carrying an edge Elira had not heard from him before, "which is why we must ensure he never has the opportunity." Aldrich bowed and departed, and only then did Cade turn toward the corner where Elira stood waiting, his expression softening slightly as their eyes met. "You heard all of that," he said. "I did," Elira admitted. "Your Majesty, if my presence here has caused rumors that lead Draven to his suspicions, perhaps it would be safer if I stayed away from the private study for a time, until this danger passes." "No." Cade's answer came swift and firm, surprising her. "Whatever strength my wolf has regained these past weeks, we will need every bit of it if Draven Cole intends to march on this castle. Pulling away now would undo everything we have built, and leave me weaker precisely when I can least afford it." The shadow wolf, sensing the tension between them, moved from its place near Elira's feet and crossed the hall to press against Cade's leg, a gesture of solidarity that seemed to steady something in his posture immediately. "Then what do we do?" Elira asked. "We prepare," Cade said, "and we hope that whatever bond has formed between the three of us proves strong enough to withstand whatever Draven Cole intends to bring against these walls." 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Elira found herself pressed into service, far beyond her usual kitchen duties, helping prepare supplies for the soldiers gathering along the castle walls, carrying messages between the kitchens, and the makeshift infirmary being readied for wounded that had not yet arrived. Throughout it all, the shadow wolf remained close, sometimes trailing behind her through the corridors, other times settling near Cade during his endless meetings with generals and advisors, splitting its presence between them in a way that seemed to strengthen rather than weaken either connection. On the 4th evening, word arrived that Draven Cole's forces had made camp just beyond the eastern hills, close enough that scouts reported seeing their fires burning against the darkening sky. Cade summoned Elira to the private study one final time, before what everyone expected would be a confrontation the following day. "He has requested a formal meeting," Cade explained, pacing before the fire, his composure fraying at the edges, despite his best efforts to hide it. "Tomorrow morning, before the walls, with both our advisors present as witnesses. He claims he wishes only to discuss terms of peace between our territories." "You do not believe him," Elira said. "I believe he wishes to humiliate me publicly," Cade said, "to expose my broken bond in front of witnesses from both our packs, weakening my standing so thoroughly that even my own advisors begin to question my fitness to rule." "Can he do that?" Expose something that no one else has been able to see for 11 years? Cade stopped pacing and looked at her directly. I do not know, he admitted, but there are rumors that Draven Cole has consulted with dark practitioners in recent years, seeking knowledge and power through means most alphas consider forbidden. If he has found a way to reveal broken bonds to ordinary eyes, tomorrow could go very badly for both of us. Illyra felt the shadow wolf press closer against her legs, its presence steady but tense, as though it, too, understood the weight of what tomorrow might bring. Whatever happens, she said, I will be there. Illyra. Cade's voice carried genuine alarm now. You cannot attend a formal meeting between rival alphas. Servants do not stand among witnesses to matters of pack sovereignty. If Draven Cole sees you there, sees how closely my wolf remains near you, he will understand immediately what he is dealing with. Then I will stay out of sight, Illyra said firmly. But I will not simply wait in the kitchens while you face him alone. If your wolf's strength depends even partly on my presence, then my presence is exactly what you need tomorrow, whether Draven Cole sees me directly or not. Cade studied her for a long moment, something fierce and protective, and reluctantly admiring crossing his features all at once. You are far braver than any kitchen maid has reason to be, he said finally. Perhaps, Illyra said. Kitchen maids simply never had reason to be brave before now. The following morning arrived cold and gray, mist clinging to the hills beyond the castle walls, where Draven Cole's forces waited, banners raised in colors Illyra did not recognize. She positioned herself near a narrow window overlooking the meeting ground, close enough to watch, far enough to remain unseen. The shadow wolf pressed silently against her side as Cade walked out to meet his rival, flanked by Aldrich Fenn and a handful of trusted guards. Draven Cole stood tall and confident at the center of his own gathered advisors, a broad smile spreading across his face the moment Cade came into view, the kind of smile that promised nothing good for anyone standing on the opposite side of whatever game he intended to play. Cade Ashreaver, Draven called out, his voice carrying easily across the open ground between them. It has been far too long since our packs last spoke as equals. Shall we discuss terms, or shall we discuss the rather more interesting rumors reaching my ears about the state of your bond? Illyra's grip tightened on the windowsill, and beside her, the shadow wolf let out a low, almost inaudible growl, the first sound of open aggression she had ever heard from it. Whatever careful peace they had built over these past weeks, it seemed, was about to be tested in front of an audience neither of them could afford to fail. I did not come here to discuss rumors, Cade said, his voice carrying the same cold authority Illyra remembered from her very first night in the Great Hall, weeks ago, though she knew now what careful effort it took him to sound so unshaken. I came to discuss the raids along my northern border, and the villages your forces burned without provocation. Draven Cole laughed, a sound that carried no real humor in it at all. Provocation, he repeated. Is that truly what concerns you, Cade? Or are you simply eager to change the subject before we discuss why your own advisors have begun whispering about strange behavior from their king, locked away for hours with a kitchen servant, neglecting the duties of his throne? Tell me, does the great Alpha King still command a wolf at all, or does he merely command an empty shadow that dances for no one? A murmur rippled through the gathered advisors on both sides, and Illyra felt her stomach twist painfully as she watched Aldrich Fenn's face tighten with barely concealed alarm. Beside her, hidden from view, the shadow wolf's growl deepened, though it remained otherwise invisible to every eye in that courtyard except her own. You speak of things you do not understand, Cade said evenly, though Illyra could see the strain beginning to show in the rigid line of his shoulders. Do I? Draven stepped forward, confidence radiating from every movement. I have spent years consulting scholars far beyond the reach of your kingdom, Cade. Men who study old rituals your own advisors dismissed as superstition generations ago. I know precisely what Garen Pike attempted 11 years ago, and I know precisely what remains of your bond because of it. A shadow. A fragment. Nothing more. If you know so much, Cade said, then perhaps you also know that a fragment, properly tended, can grow strong again. Draven's confident smile faltered, just barely, though Illyra caught it from her hidden vantage point above the courtyard. An interesting claim, he said. Prove it then. Summon your wolf before these witnesses, in full form, and I will withdraw my forces from your borders without further conflict. Silence fell across the courtyard, thick and suffocating. Elira's heart pounded as she watched Cade's expression, searching for some sign of what he intended to do. She knew, better than anyone standing in that courtyard, exactly how fragile his wolf's restored strength remained, how many weeks of careful, patient effort had gone into coaxing it back from 11 years of silent isolation. Beside her, the shadow wolf shifted restlessly, its attention torn between Cade standing exposed before his rival, and Elira hidden safely above. She felt something pulling at her chest, an unspoken question passing between them through whatever bond had grown over these past weeks. She made a decision, before she had fully thought it through. Elira slipped away from the window, and moved quickly through the castle corridors, her heart hammering, until she reached a small door leading out onto a lower balcony, overlooking the courtyard, close enough now that anyone below might see her clearly, if they simply looked up. "Cade," she called softly, though her voice seemed to carry farther than she intended, in the tense silence of the gathered crowd. Every head turned toward the sound, including Draven Cole's, his eyes narrowing with sudden interest as he took in the sight of a plain servant girl, standing on the balcony above, her apron still dusted faintly with flour from that morning's baking. "Elira, what are you doing?" Cade's voice carried genuine alarm now, though he kept his composure carefully controlled in front of his rival. "Ah," Draven said slowly, a slow, delighted smile spreading across his face as understanding dawned. "So this is the servant girl the rumors speak of. Tell me, little maid, do you also see something the rest of us cannot?" Elira felt every eye in that courtyard turn toward her, and for one terrifying moment, she considered retreating back through the door and pretending none of this had happened. But beside her, though invisible to everyone else present, the shadow wolf pressed close against her legs, steady and warm, lending her a courage she was not entirely certain belonged to her alone. "I see a king," she said clearly, her voice steadier than she expected, "who has spent 11 years quietly rebuilding something an enemy tried to destroy, without ever once asking for pity or special treatment because of it. I see a man who has led this pack through hardship without the full strength others assumed he possessed, and led it well regardless." Draven's smile faded slightly, replaced by something colder and more calculating. "And what do you see of his wolf, exactly?" he pressed, "since you seem so eager to speak on his behalf." Elira glanced down at Cade, meeting his eyes across the distance between them, and saw something there that steadied her further, a silent trust extended fully in a single glance. "I see loyalty," she said. "I see a spirit that never abandoned its king, even when broken, even when silent, even when every scholar and healer in this kingdom insisted it could never heal. I see something that grows stronger every single day, whether or not you or anyone else in this courtyard is capable of witnessing it." The shadow wolf, as though responding directly to her words, began to shift and change beside her, its edges sharpening, its form growing more solid than Elira had ever witnessed before. She felt a rush of warmth flood through her chest, and glancing down again, she saw Cade's eyes widen with something between shock and wonder, as he too seemed to sense the change taking place. Slowly, impossibly, the shadow began to separate itself from pure darkness, taking on the faintest outline of fur and muscle, still translucent, still incomplete, but undeniably more real than the formless shape it had been only weeks before. It moved from Elira's side, descending the balcony steps she had not even noticed existed, and crossed the courtyard floor, to stand directly beside Cade, visible now, faintly, to every single person gathered there. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Aldrich Fenn's hand flew to his chest in astonishment. Even Draven Cole took an involuntary step backward, his earlier confidence crumbling into something far more uncertain. "That is not possible," Draven said, though his voice had lost its earlier bravado entirely. "And yet," Cade said, his voice steady once more, gaining strength with every passing second as his restored wolf settled beside him. "Here it stands." The faint outline of the wolf standing beside Cade flickered like candlelight in wind, not fully solid, not entirely whole, but undeniably present for every eye in that courtyard to witness. Draven Cole stared at it, with an expression caught somewhere between disbelief and calculation, clearly recalculating whatever plan he had arrived with that morning. "A trick," he said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. some illusion crafted by your advisors to save face in front of witnesses. Ask your own scholars, Cade said, his composure fully restored now, strengthened visibly by the presence solidifying beside him. The ones who taught you about broken bonds and forbidden rituals. Ask them whether illusions can be crafted before the eyes of dozens of witnesses without a single flaw in the performance. Draven's jaw tightened, and for a long moment, silence stretched between the two rival alphas, broken only by the restless shifting of soldiers on both sides, uncertain how to respond to a scene none of them had ever witnessed before. This changes nothing regarding the burned villages, Draven said finally, retreating to safer ground. Grain stores destroyed, guards wounded, families displaced before winter. Whatever strength your wolf has regained, it does not erase the harm already done. No, Cade agreed, it does not. But it does mean that any further aggression against my territory will be met by a king with the full strength his position requires, not the weakened target you believed you were dealing with. Draven studied him for a long moment, something calculating shifting behind his eyes as he weighed his options. Finally, with visible reluctance, he inclined his head slightly, a gesture that fell short of true respect, but acknowledged, at least, a shift in circumstances he had not anticipated. We will discuss reparations for the villages, he said, and a formal treaty regarding our shared borders. But do not mistake this meeting for surrender, Cade Ashriver. I withdraw today, because the terms have changed, not because I fear you. Understood, Cade said evenly. I look forward to seeing whether your actions match your words in the days ahead. Draven turned and gathered his advisors, retreating toward the eastern hills where his forces waited, though Alira noticed the stiffness in his shoulders, the barely concealed frustration in every step he took away from the castle grounds. Once his party had disappeared over the ridge, a collective exhale seemed to pass through everyone remaining in the courtyard, tension draining from soldiers and advisors alike. Cade turned toward the balcony where Alira still stood, and for a moment, neither of them moved, simply staring at each other across the distance that separated them, the flickering wolf beside him, solid enough now that every soul in that courtyard could see it clearly. Aldrich Fenn approached Cade slowly, his expression a mixture of awe and lingering confusion. Your Majesty, he said carefully, perhaps you might explain to your advisors precisely what we all just witnessed. Cade glanced once more toward Alira before answering. It is a long story, Aldrich, one I will explain fully, once matters here are settled. For now, understand only that my bond has begun healing after 11 years of silence, and that the woman standing on that balcony played no small part in making it possible. Every eye in the courtyard turned toward Alira again, and this time she did not shrink away from the attention, though her cheeks flushed warmly under the weight of so many curious stares. She descended the balcony stairs slowly, her legs still unsteady from the tension of the confrontation, and crossed the courtyard to stand beside Cade and his newly visible wolf. Up close, the wolf's form remained translucent, edges soft and shifting like smoke caught in sunlight, but its eyes, when it turned to look at her, burned with a clarity and warmth that had been entirely absent from the formless shadow she had first encountered weeks earlier. Thank you, Cade said quietly, for her ears alone amid the murmuring crowd around them. I do not know what I would have done today, without you standing where you stood. You would have found a way, Alira said. You are stronger than you believe yourself to be, Your Majesty. You always have been, even when your bond remained broken. Cade studied her for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them that neither dared voice fully in front of the gathered advisors and soldiers still watching them closely. Aldrich cleared his throat gently, breaking the moment. Your Majesty, he said, the pack will want answers, formal answers, given the scale of what just occurred before witnesses from both territories. They will have them, Cade said, straightening and turning back toward the gathered crowd with renewed authority. Gather the pack elders and advisors in the great hall this evening. It is time the full truth was finally spoken aloud, without secrecy, without fear of what enemies might do with the knowledge. The great hall filled that evening with more people than Alira had ever seen gathered in one place. Pack elders and generals and advisors from every corner of the kingdom, all summoned to hear what their king intended to reveal. Alira stood near the edge of the room, uncertain of her place among such important company, though the wolf, now solid enough to draw curious glances from those who passed near it, remained close beside her, rather than at Cade's side alone. Cade stood before the assembled crowd, and for the first time in 11 years, he spoke openly of Garen Pike's betrayal, of the broken bond he had hidden from his own advisors out of fear and necessary caution, and of the unexpected seer who had arrived in his kitchens 3 years earlier, unknowingly carrying the very gift needed to begin mending what had been shattered. Elira Voss, he said, turning toward her as murmurs rippled through the crowd, has spent these past weeks helping restore what an enemy tried to destroy, at considerable personal risk to herself. Whatever debt this kingdom owes for the strength returning to its king, it owes first and foremost to her. The great hall fell silent, dozens of eyes turning toward Elira, weighing this revelation with expressions ranging from disbelief to cautious respect. She felt her heart pound furiously beneath her plain servant's dress, uncertain how pack elders accustomed to bloodlines and formal titles would receive news that a simple kitchen maid held such importance in their king's restoration. Aldrich Fenn stepped forward first, bowing deeply before her, an act that sent a fresh wave of murmurs through the assembled crowd. "Then this pack owes you gratitude beyond measure," he said solemnly. "Whatever your birth, whatever your former position within these walls, you have earned a place of honor here today." One by one, hesitantly at first, and then with growing conviction, other advisors and elders followed his example, until Elira stood surrounded by bowed heads throughout the entire great hall, the wolf resting calmly beside her, its translucent form glowing faintly in the candlelight, like something finally, truly, coming home. The weeks following that evening in the great hall brought changes to Elira's life that she could scarcely have imagined only months earlier. She no longer carried trays through the dining hall or scrubbed pots late into the night, though she insisted on visiting Marta in the kitchens often, unwilling to fully abandon the woman who had shown her quiet kindness during her years of humble service. Cade insisted she remain close to the castle's upper wings, partly for continued study of the strengthening bond between them, and partly, Elira suspected, for reasons neither of them had yet found the courage to name aloud. The wolf, now fully visible to anyone who looked, had grown steadily more solid with each passing week, its once translucent form filling out into something that finally resembled a true, living creature, rather than a fragile shadow of memory. It followed Elira through the castle corridors, as naturally as it followed Cade, sometimes trailing behind her when she visited the kitchens, other times resting quietly beside the great fireplace in the private study, while she and Cade continued the careful work of understanding exactly what their unusual bond meant for the future of his rule. Draven Cole, true to his word, entered into formal negotiations regarding the northern raids, though tension between the two territories remained far from fully resolved. Reparations were agreed upon for the destroyed villages, and a fragile treaty took shape over several difficult weeks of diplomatic exchange, though every advisor in Cade's court understood that lasting peace with the Eastern Pacts would require years of careful vigilance, rather than a single successful confrontation. "He will test us again," Cade said one evening, as he and Elira sat together in the private study that had become as familiar to her now as the kitchens once had been. Men like Draven Cole do not simply accept defeat and move forward peacefully. He will wait, and watch, and search for another opportunity. "Then we will be ready," Elira said, and found that she believed it fully, without the fear that once accompanied such thoughts. "Your wolf grows stronger every day. Whatever weakness he hoped to exploit no longer exists." Cade reached across the small space between their chairs and took her hand gently, a gesture that had become increasingly natural between them over these past weeks, though neither had yet spoken openly of what it truly meant. "Elira," he said quietly, "I have consulted the old texts further, seeking to understand fully what has grown between the three of us these past months. The passages are clearer than I initially realized, once I knew precisely what questions to ask." "What do they say?" Elira asked. "They say that when a seer's bond with a wolf spirit grows strong enough, complete enough, it does not simply heal what was broken. It transforms the bond entirely, weaving the seer's own spirit into something shared, permanent, unbreakable, by any ritual or betrayal an enemy might attempt in the future." Elira felt her breath catch. "Are you saying—" "I am saying," Cade continued, his voice steady, despite the vulnerability evident in his expression, "that what exists between us now is no longer simply a broken bond in the process of mending. It has become something new entirely, a bond between an alpha and a mate whose spirit was always meant to walk beside his own, though neither of us understood that truth when you first dropped that tray in my great hall months ago." The wolf, resting near the hearth, lifted its head at these words, its clear, warm eyes moving between them both, with something that looked remarkably like satisfaction. "I am only a kitchen maid," Illyra said softly, though the words carried less conviction now than they once had. "The court elders accepted my role in healing your bond, but a mate, a true partner beside the throne, that is a different matter entirely. You were never only a kitchen maid," Cade said firmly. "You were a seer, who saw truth others could not, who offered comfort and courage when I desperately needed both, who stood before witnesses from both our territories, and spoke of loyalty and strength, without a single trace of fear in your voice. The court elders who bowed before you that evening understood exactly what you had become, even before I fully understood it myself." Illyra felt tears gathering unexpectedly at the corners of her eyes, though they carried none of the fear or uncertainty that had marked so much of her journey these past months. Only warmth, steady and complete, settling deep within her chest, alongside the bond she now shared with both the king and his restored wolf. 3 weeks later, the great hall filled once more, though this time for an entirely different purpose. Pack elders and advisors from across the kingdom gathered to witness a formal ceremony, one that had not been performed in this castle for over a decade, joining an alpha king to the mate his spirit had chosen for him. Illyra stood at the center of that hall, no longer dressed in a plain gray servant's dress, but in fine fabric befitting her new position, though she insisted, quietly, on keeping one small piece of her old life close. Tucked carefully into the folds of the elegant gown she wore that day was a simple apron, the very one that had carried an invisible shadow through countless kitchen chores months earlier, folded now and pressed against her heart as a reminder of exactly how far this unlikely journey had carried her. Cade stood beside her, his wolf fully solid now, standing proud and strong at his side, visible to every soul gathered in that great hall. When the ceremony concluded and the pack elders rose to their feet in recognition of their new queen, Illyra glanced down at the wolf resting calmly between them, remembering the frightened girl who had once dropped a tray of food simply because she had seen something no one else could. That girl, timid and unseen, had somehow become exactly what an ancient bond had always been waiting for. The wolf, once hidden in silent shadow for 11 long years, now stood boldly in the light, visible to all, protecting a king and his queen with equal devotion, its long isolation finally, completely, and joyfully at its end. Illyra reached down and rested her hand gently against its solid, warm fur, feeling the steady pulse of a bond that would never again need to hide beneath an apron, in the darkness, or in silence. It had found its home, and so, at long last, had she.